Yeah.
So then we could give variables for these. So for example, give students the final and the first and last days of class, independently measure students' abilities to see how they do to isolate the effects of the professor, assign students materials from different courses, but according to these authors, colleges don't do this, so they're not very rigorous in their methodology. Most SETs, we're just going to call them student evaluations, SETs, don't actually measure how much how much students learn. At most, they ask how much they think they learned. Any thoughts or comments on this so far?
Yeah, this one reminds me a bit of something I think it was James Lindsay might have mentioned this when he was talking about the the incident, the whole thing that happened at Evergreen State University, which was where Brett Weinstein and Heather Hay, his wife, were teaching, and that was, I think, one of the things that really catapulted some of this critical theory in universities onto at least an American-wide scale and a global scale to a more extent of it. And he was talking about how it wasn't necessarily the content alone, but it was the enabling of using these kind of systems where they had this kind of student evaluation system where the students were allowed to decide how they were being taught, what they were being taught.
Yeah.
They were the ones completely evaluating. Instead of, I'm not saying it should just be on one end, where in my experience of being in schools here in Kenya, there's not that much of there's a fear, there's an outright palpable fear of the students to the teachers. Now, that could be more due to the environments. That is definitely in part due to the fact that, from my personal experience and my current knowledge, I do know that there's still corporal punishment in schools, like kneel on the corner, get your fingers beaten with sticks, like people being beaten with different implements, grabbing like things from the curtains, and just there's still regular beating. So that's a common thing. So you start building that dynamics, you add the societal dynamics, so you just have to respect your elders. So it's not a conducive environment in that one end. But then on the inverse, you had what happened in Evergreen, where the kids just kind of went roughshod on the school, and that just slowly by slowly started crumbling any actual system, any civilized way, any civil way to actually achieve the goals of an institution of learning. And I think that's a similar thing where if you have an institution where kids are so afraid of their teachers, like from my experience where I asked them, do you guys understand this lesson? And then they all say yes, because I don't know if they're used to just not being asked, or if they feel by saying no, it would be something I would take as a judgment on me, then I would hold it against them. Then the assignment comes and it's clear that they didn't answer it because maybe 1 out of the 10 students actually even did the basics of the assignment because they weren't understanding just some simple things. So that's something that's on one end. And then the inverse, it's, oh, you can't ask me. I just know I should do this. So let's just stick with the horoscope. I'm just sticking with that. About how you evaluate things, what you consider to be actually a valid way of actually structuring something. Imagine if you went to a university and they're like, okay, this is a horoscope university. We're going to choose when you sign up by horoscopes, your dorms by horoscopes, your diet by horoscopes, your major by horoscopes. Oh, only Scorpios can only learn from Cancers. So those are the only people together. Like, you're only allowed to deal with these people. All the teams on sporting teams are decided via horoscopes. At the end of the day, like, we're going to decide your grades not because of what you actually put in, but via horoscopes. So the teacher is going to read their horoscope today, and through that, they're going to devise on the way of like grading all these things. Would anyone actually consider that to be something that is a valid way of actually running an institution? I don't think they would, even the people who completely read their horoscopes on a day-to-day basis. So that's just about understanding different forms of evaluating different content and what is the best way and better ways of doing things and achieving that level of achieving the goals that we're all interested in actually achieving.
Well, and also to add on to that too, some of this changes with maturity. Like, for example, I had this French teacher in school who was really tough, and it was one of those things where a lot of people complained about her, but then they look back and they're like, we learned more from her than probably anyone else. And then there were other teachers who were fun and easygoing, but then you look back, you're like, I don't remember anything I was taught in that class. So there's that too. But then with my French teacher, it was interesting because like I thought about it more later, and I was talking to a friend about this. Like, she was just a no bullshit kind of person. Like, study, pay attention. She because the classes were small, she knew if you weren't paying attention, she'd call on you. She wasn't afraid to call you out in front of other students. So she made sure you paid attention. she would give feedback. She was tough, but again, it's like she was trying to prepare people. She's like, look, if you go to a college, especially a better one, they're going to expect this from you. And that's what she was trying to prepare people for. So you look back, if more teachers were like that, ultimately we'd be a lot better off. But at the time as a teenager, you're like, oh, she's just being mean. So there's that angle too.
Yeah.
So mathematician Phil, sorry, go ahead.
I just think, like, a simple thing I think we can all agree on is there should be. I guess they do the whole thing where you can go and you can visit a college, you can do this, but then just think about your average 17-year-old, your average 16 to 18-year-old. Do people really think that average 16 to 18-year-old can be taken to a university or do a university visit and have a good enough idea about where they want to spend the next 4 years of their life?
Yeah.
That is something that I think, why not take a year off or take some time? What is that about the American system that makes people feel it has to be directly after K through 12, directly into the university system? That's one thing that I'm not quite sure, and that's something that is duplicated in other places. And some other places I can understand where it's just like, oh, we need to get this person, we need money from this person. But then it's different. I think in part due to the whole ability that it's been subsidized by the government so much in these public institutions, like we just saw, we talked about in the last video with Harvard is $73,000 or something like that a year, but after the grants that your average student has, grants and scholarships and things like that, it comes down to like $15,000, which is actually less than what Keene State is after grants and all those things, which is $18,000. So that's the kind of thing where maybe people think, okay, since we don't really have to pay right now, we don't really have to be that solid about the decision that we're making. But it's just, I just feel people are very unprepared going into that system. And even through saying parents are involved. But on average, your parents, how much time have your parents actually spent with the child to understand this is my child's abilities? Haven't they been K through 12 for those at least 12 years? What if you take a year off, you shadow your parents at whatever it is they're doing and get to understand them better? There's just so many other ways of doing these things. And I'm thinking it's upsetting. It's unfortunate.
To sort of add on to this, I think of Walter Williams talking about going back to college later. Like, I think he went to the Army and then went back later. And he actually said, he's like, I'm glad I did. He's like, if I had went to college out of high school, I would have been a disaster. He's like, I had no discipline. I was fooling around. But by that time I was an adult. And I think it was Charles Murray who was actually saying that they've studied this, like people who go through the military, then go to college actually do well because they have the maturity, they have the discipline, they take things seriously. So they're mature adults ready to handle the work and they work hard versus, okay, these are kids who just want to party, sleep around, all that. And it's going to produce a much different kind of education. And then the other thing too is I've had these sort of debates about the quality of the CIA where I went with my mother, where she'll always say things like, oh, it's a nice school. But then I'm like, what are you basing that off of? And I'm like, you're basing it off of the previous reputation and you like eating there. And I'm like, yeah, I had a lot of fun when I had a lot of fun when I was there. I like the restaurants, all that. But you didn't go there, work in the industry and sort of weigh, okay, what did I learn there? How did it translate? It's kind of hard to measure those things unless you're actually in it. That's the whole point. Yeah. I had fun when I was there. Yeah, it's a nice campus. Yeah, they have great restaurants. But does that mean that you got a great education? Is it worth what you paid? No. And then she'll say things to me like, well, a lot of people learn on the job and all that. But I'm like, but again, this gets to the fundamentals of what we're talking about. Why pay all that money if you're going to learn it at work anyway? It's no.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you for listening. This has been a clip from an actual longer recording that I'll try to leave a link to on the screen or somewhere around here where you're listening to this.
Presents. 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 Presents.
Peasants.
Okay.